Good afternoon. Welcome back to the B&H virtual event space. My favorite topic, street photography. And to go over it with us, Zeiss Lens Ambassador Kenneth Hines Jr. is joining us. Welcome to the virtual space, Kenneth.
Thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be here today and share with you all about some of the pictures that I've done.
Awesome. I know it's been a wild year, it's especially for street photography. The past year it's been a little rocky, a little shaky, but hey, we got a preview of these images. You guys are definitely in for a treat over the next hour. Kenneth's going to be talking about letting your feelings guide you. So really just getting into the moment. We always like when we have these creative process discussions where it's not just all technical stuff all the time, but getting behind the mind of the photographer and learning the stories and learning what's going through your head and how you're trying to convey what you're trying to convey. So super excited for the next hour. And whether you've joined us a million times or you joined us for the first time, we will be taking your questions throughout. Kenneth has given us the green light. If you have a question during, throw it in. If you're here on Zoom, we have the Q&A module there. And if you're joining us on Facebook or live stream, you can simply drop your question or comment into the comment section, and we'll get it routed over here to ask it to Kenneth. So that being said, huge thank you to our sponsor for today's event, Zeiss Lenses. Kenneth, take it away, man.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So I thought, there's a lot of content out there. And as was shared, a lot of people give the sort of technical uh, side of street photography. And I didn't want to take that approach. I actually want to talk about some of the images that I've done and also present several new images that a lot of people have not seen me share online before. So kind of just jumping right in because I definitely always like to stick to a material driven broadcast. So I want to get through as much of the content as possible and get through as many questions as possible. So a little bit about me. I'm a Zeiss Lenses ambassador, also a Google and Surrey ambassador. I am a photographer that's actually featured for the 2021 Adobe Lightroom splash screen cover. So if you utilize Lightroom, you may have seen my picture there. I'm a multidiscipline photographer. Basically, I photograph everything. Nothing is off limits to me. So I don't like introductions or things about myself going too long. So with that said, we'll get started. So this first image is one that I took that some people have seen over the past year now, which is in Times Square. And I avoid Times Square like the plague. It's so many people. Of course, this was pre-pandemic, it was a lot of people. It just really frustrates you sometimes to go through Times Square. You have to be in the right mindset to go through there. So I decided one day I was in a chipper mood and I decided to just pick up my 35, or I'm sorry, my Bodice 25 and just stand on the street corners because I just wanted to look at the movement that was going around. Look at, people are rushing through. Some people are gazing at the different billboards that are out there in Times Square. And I hadn't really shot with a wide angle lens in Times Square. And when people see this with the sort of long exposure here where the people are sort of, drifting along, a lot of people assume I use a tripod. I never use a tripod for street photography. So this is actually handheld. The way that goes about is I simply know my limitations when it comes to how long I can handhold my camera and lens combination without having any kind of movement. Now, I will say I do cheat sometimes. If there's like a post or, a mailbox on a street corner, I will use that to where I could go even longer if I want to. But if I don't have that, it's always handheld. And so I just really wanted to drag the shutter a little bit of the people at the intersection, crossing the street. And, that was kind of my focus for the day. I actually stayed out there about 2 hours. Most people don't spend that long in Times Square. If you're in New York and live there, you don't spend that kind of time in Times Square. So first question is, what camera or cameras do I utilize? So I've gone through many different camera systems over the years, but the current ones right now is the Sony Alpha 9, the Sony Alpha 6000, I know that one's going to surprise a lot of people, as well as the Sony Alpha 7R2 and 3. So the reason for my choices is that the Alpha 9, many people position it as a sports camera or wildlife camera, but I never utilize it for the burst shooting. Yes, it does 20 frames per second, but since I've owned this camera since it came out in 2017, I may have only tried burst shooting maybe 3 or 4 times in that time frame. The reason I like that camera for street is because it's the best on autofocus. It really is the camera to where you can't miss a shot. If you do, you did something wrong. That's how I look at it. Having that extra mode dial also allows me to have better shooting experience, just having uh, those specific menu options outside of the camera. It just kind of makes it a lot easier for me. Now the 6000 is a surprise because it's like if you have an A9, why have an A6000? Especially, it's 7 years old this year. The reason being is I just like keeping it because many people assume my pictures look the way that they do because I use expensive equipment. That's not the case. I can use a Sony A6000 and still take the same pictures that I would with the A9. Yes, it has older features. It doesn't have the same focusing system of the newer cameras, but I really love this camera because it's a smaller body. It's much lighter. And for those times when I really want to be discreet, I can do that with the 6000. And also just great for any time when people have those comments of you're only great because you have an A9. Well, let me show you the A6000 pictures. And so it just always, surprises people about that. And then also I have the 7R2 and 3. So I recently retired the 2 and switched back to the R3. But now I'm actually retired the R3 because I'm getting the new Sony Alpha 1. So I'm excited about that. I don't shoot a lot of street with the higher megapixel cameras just because for street, it's not necessary to have 42 megapixels. I prefer my 24 megapixel cameras. That's why I love the 9 and the 6000. So here's what lenses do I utilize for my street photos? So I have broken this up into 2 different sets. So the first are my street trio of autofocus lenses. So I have the Bodice, Zeiss Bodice 25, the 40 millimeter close focus, and then my favorite, the 85 1.8 Zeiss Bodice. Those are my sort of go-to lenses for any of my street, especially that 85. The reason why I started with an 85 was because most people associated street with 35 millimeters, 50 millimeters. I wanted to be doing something different. I don't like following the crowd. So when I first started using an 85 about four or so years ago, I got the comments that that's not street photography. That's not a street lens. When you purchase a lens, if you go into B&H and you look at every single lens that's on a shelf, it doesn't say street lens 50 millimeter, wedding lens 70 to 200. It just has the focal length. It does not have a specific genre. So why classify lenses that way? That's why I decided to try out the 85. And just because of my specific kind of nature and character, it was more comfortable for me. That's why I started with the telephoto lens. But now, because I've gotten so used to it, I can shoot wider. So these are some of the examples of shooting those various lenses. The 25 really gets more of the scene, but I'm having to be a lot closer to my subjects. The 40 is a nice middle ground, not too tight, not too wide. Good lens choice for those moments where I might be indecisive. I don't know what I want to do for that day. Do I want to focus on specific people, or do I want to include some of more of what's around people into the scene? It just depends on how I feel. And of course, you have the 85 where I just love that long reach with that lens. So then I also have my manual focus trio of lenses, which are the Zeiss Loxia 21, the 35, and 50 millimeter lenses. So I like using manual lenses just because it slows me down. My shooting is a lot different. I'm more a part of the scene. I'm more a part of what I'm doing. I'm more a part of actually focusing on utilizing my camera, really analyzing the compositions more. With autofocus, I tend to speed through things. And with the pandemic taking place, it made me realize that more. So I actually kind of made more of a shift from using autofocus to more manuals this past year. And it has helped me kind of focus more on the types of images that I produce. So a lot of people have a lot of hesitation with using manual focus lenses, but they are very easy to use. The one key difference is that you don't utilize manual focus lenses the same way that you use an autofocus lens. Just don't. And once you understand that, it's very easy. And I know someone's probably going to ask this question: why have manual specific lenses as opposed to using your autofocus lenses in manual? The reason being is my Zeiss Bodice lenses do not have any of these markings that you see on the screen. So I don't ever know where my actual distance is because it's a focus by wire system, whereas the Loxia lenses are mechanical. So once I set my zone focus for that lens, I exactly know where the focusing is because I can see those measurements on the lens. So having that mechanical operation makes it easier to actually go about manually focusing. And plus, it's the actual true way to do manual focus. If you're utilizing the focus by wire lenses in manual, you're not really getting a true manual focus experience.
Kenneth, we did have a couple questions already. One is going back to the first image you showed in Times Square with the blur.
Mhm.
So we had Joanne, who's joining us from Facebook, asking how long can you handhold? So what point do you set your shutter speed that is kind of like your make or break line for getting a solid image? And then Jerry, who's joining us here on Zoom, is asking if you remember what approximate shutter speed you were at on that Times Square photo.
Yes. So I was maybe about a fourth of a second. I generally about a fourth to a tenth of a second. That's usually how long I can hand hold. The depending on the lens, in that case, because it was a wider lens, a 25, I can sometimes get away going a little bit longer because the wider lenses are a little bit forgiving when it comes to motion versus more telephoto lenses. So on good days, I can get about a tenth, sometimes a little bit wider or a little bit slower. Just depends.
That's some steady hands, steady hands. Now we have a question from Nanso joining us on live stream. In particular, you were just talking about focusing and the difference between manual focus and autofocus with the zone focusing. What do you use primarily? Do you still zone focus when you're using the cameras that have the automatic focus lenses, or are you using the benefits of autofocus when you are using the non-manual lenses?
So with the autofocus lenses, I don't ever switch them to manual, just because I can't ever pinpoint the distance. Now, the good side of the bodice lens is because it has that OLED display. So if you are using that lens in manual, you actually can get away with that. Some of the other lenses you can't do that because you're not ever sure of where your focus is. So once you set it, you're not sure of where that is. It can be anywhere. And if you want to go back for reference, oh, where is my focusing at? You can't tell. That's the thing of why using the autofocus lenses in manual doesn't work too well. Versus, the Loxias here, if I hold that up, if I set my aperture to say f8, and then wherever my distance is between that area on this ring, I know once my subject gets into that parameter, everything's going to be in focus because I can see that. I know that it's going to always be set. If I need to remind myself, oh, what am I set to? It's right there. There are some photographers that will put a little bit of black tape to hold the focus. Now, great thing with these lenses, the focus does not slip. So I've never had to worry about that. Once I set it, I don't have to worry about shifting it. Now I do have those moments where I accidentally hit it. That's where, because I have done that, Fortunately enough, I'm smart enough to remember, maybe you want to go back and check the focus to make sure you got it right. A couple of times I have totally missed a shot.
Now,
Um,
now, what about as far as modes? Are you a single point? Do you use tracking? Do you use the face and eye detect? Now that you're getting the Alpha 1, I know they're going to have incredible upgrades to the autofocus on that. Which settings do you use particularly for autofocus?
so I always stay with flexible spot, and I do the switch horizontal vertical option with flexible spot. So that way, depending on if I'm taking a photo horizontally, my focus point is in the spot that I want it. And then when I also go to take those portrait oriented photos, the focus area shifts into the area that I want it for that orientation as well. So a lot of the shots that I take, because I'm very specific on how I shoot my street images, that I actually don't always look at the screen when I take an image, because there are some moments where I just have to react. I don't have time to really focus and compose, but I know where my focus is, and I know it's a quirky thing. I know it's hard to explain it. I have demonstrated this during workshops before to show people how it works, because I'm like, that's the best way I can ever do it. You have to be there to see it.
Now, do you, Nanso just re-upped on that question. Do you use single autofocus or continuous? Do you just keep continuous focus on while you're shooting street?
That's a good question. So I use both. Here's why I use both. I use continuous for subjects that are moving. I use single for subjects that aren't moving. The reason why I don't keep it on one versus the other, for example, I don't keep it on continuous, is because if I'm focused on a subject that's not moving, the camera is still going to be trying to find something to focus on in wherever your framing is for your focus. So it could be that very split second that you take an image and it's not focused on the area that you want it to.
Mhm.
So in that regards, I will utilize single because my subject isn't moving, so I don't have to worry about anything shifting. But if my subject is moving, definitely continuous.
All right, and we'll sneak one more question in, Kenneth, before we let you continue on here. And I think this will kind of set the stage for looking at some more of your images. Michael, who's joining us on Facebook, asks how much. I know now. I know you said you don't always have your eye up to the viewfinder, so I know you probably do shoot from the hip at least some of the time. What percentage do you shoot from the hip, from the chest, not looking into the either the LCD or the viewfinder?
Hip and chest is probably, I would say, 98% of the time. It's
Wow.
very seldom that I'm at eye level. And the reason being, and you're right, that is a good segue for some of my images, is that you'll see that they're either right at someone's, like right a smidge below their eye level, or very low below their eye level. And the reason for that is because it gives a nice perception as far as making people look bigger than life, because you're able to get the tallness of the buildings behind someone while also including that person or that subject or subjects within that frame. Because if I take it either at eye level, or say I'm photographing someone that is much shorter than I am, I'm aiming downward. So I'm looking at the street. There's nothing interesting about the pavement. So that's why I specifically like to either be perfectly dead on, like this image that you see on the left, where it's perfectly straight, but I'm kneeling on a moving train, which was how I got that with a manual lens. I don't know, because that train was very raggedy. But I just like having where I'm right at that point or below someone's field of view.
Perfect.
So some tips for street photography. Number one, do what's most comfortable and natural for you. Point two, do what's most comfortable and natural for you. And number three, do what's most comfortable and natural for you. I can't say that enough. The reason being is because I see a lot of people that will look at other photographers, and it's like they want to do exactly what they're doing, even if it doesn't really suit their style or how they feel. And especially with street photography, I feel like it's more about that moment. What do you feel like doing that particular day? What do you want to capture? How do you want to capture it? That's what you have to think about. It's not about, oh, I saw Kenneth do this picture. Let me go out here and use this lens and take that same picture. No, is that what you really feel? Because once you take that image, what do you think about it? Anytime I ever have someone that takes a workshop or a critique session with me, I like to talk with them and ask them first, what was going through your mind when you took this image? Do you like this photo? Is this an image that you feel is worthy of printing or submitting to an award contest or something? Like, what is it that was going in your mind to take that picture? So many, I tell a lot of people this, that I'm fortunate that I started photography before social media, because I didn't have where those distractions affected how I viewed certain things, that determined the type of gear that I purchased, because I have been Sony my entire career. This is over 12 years that I've shot Sony. I go back to the old A100, A300 days. So that shows you how long I've been with Sony. And back then, no one shot Sony pretty much. It was, the big two, Canon and Nikon. That's what everybody utilized. And everyone said, if you really want to do good photography, you have to get rid of your Sony. But I just didn't feel that way. I stuck with what I liked. That's what I felt in me to have. So that's what I shot with. And I feel like that's just something that is missed very often. So just a few points to remember. Have anticipation, being unobtrusive. That's something that I'm going to talk a little bit more with some of the other images. Know your equipment, because why this is important is because being able to take an image on the fly, you really have to know your equipment. There are times where I'm not looking at my camera, but I know it's set. I know how I shoot. I just have that muscle memory to where I can hold up an image, take the shot. And I actually have a friend of mine that was a witness to this. I took a photo, didn't look at it, but I just saw this woman crossing the street, but I loved her patterns on her scarf and her jacket. That's what got my attention. And I knew I wanted that image. And so I took it. Wasn't certain if I got it, but I felt it. I said, I know I got that image. And I only had one. I only had one. Focus was nailed. Everything was perfect. Next point is visualize the image before you capture it. I don't take a lot of images, because if I don't feel it, then I know I don't need it. I don't want to go through thousands upon thousands of photos and I'm only using a couple hundred maybe. If I'm not feeling a specific photo, and there are times where I have seen the most perfect image, but I don't capture it because my mindset wasn't there. I might see perfect image. That's good for an 85, but what I have on my camera right now is a 25 millimeter. I can't get the shot. I don't worry about it. That's the beauty of photography. Yeah, you're going to have a lot of missed opportunities, but think about the ones that you do capture. So that's just the fun of the game for me. And then lastly, be a part of the moment. I feel a lot of people just have disconnect from their photography. Feel what's around you. Be a part of what's around you, which is, enjoying that moment. You really have to be a part of the scene to capture those images that mean the most to you. It's not about the Instagram world. It's not about the Facebook world, YouTube. It's about, do you like what you're doing? Because there are going to be people that don't like the images that you take. That's okay. Everyone's not going to, but do you like it? Do you enjoy what you do? So, of course, we're in the midst of a pandemic, and I really have enjoyed capturing these people's images of people with masks on. And I saw this one, and at the time when I shot this, I did not know her mask said "sweet talk" on it. it wasn't until I was going through editing and I said, her mask says sweet talk on it. I'm like, that's kind of cute. And, I went with black and white for this because, her mask was black and white. And for certain pictures, I just love the black and white as opposed to doing a color uh, version of an image. There are times where I might mix it up. I might keep both, have a color version and a black and white. Just depends on what I felt when that image was taken and what I visualize it to be. This was one when my first flight during the pandemic, I've only done one. This was at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta Airport. And I was waiting for my flight. So while I was doing that, I just walked around the new international terminal there and was taking pictures of people with their mask on. And, to kind of really show, this is where we're living in right now. This is what has sort of become our normal life. You're masked up, you're going to this and that of places. And to have pictures of that, was really important for me just to kind of show, hey, this is something that I went through in my life. Look back at these pictures, 10, 20, 30 years from now, you know, oh yeah, I remember, we were going through a pandemic here. So this was one that I really enjoyed, where I was teaching a workshop and I was sitting in this location for about 2 hours. And so sometimes I love to do a lot of people watching. And it's kind of goes back to how I said about being a part of the scene. So I like to really analyze what's going around, look at people, what they're doing. And I especially love children. They always have the best facial expressions, always. And so I saw this woman come over, and this was around Christmas time in 2019. And I knew I can sometimes look and just think, there's a picture that's going to come out of this. Let me just be prepared. And I caught this and I thought it was the most adorable photo ever. And, it was just having that anticipation. I knew I was going to get a photo out of that. Am I always right? Not so much, maybe 80% of the time. But I just waited for it. I was like, I'm waiting for that specific photo that I want. And that's what I caught right there.
Kenneth, I'm going to jump in with a question real quick. It kind of pairs with that image right there. 'Cause we had a question from Barbara joining us here on Zoom, asking if you ever have problems photographing people on the street, how do you approach it? And I guess that always spins into the street photography question of, is there things that are off limits? Children, the homeless. How do you address sensitive topics like that? How do you address taking images of children on the street? Is it something where you don't go out of your way, or do you ask permission? How do you handle all that?
So that is a great point. And so one of the points that I was going to make is determining what street style best fits for you as a photographer. I prefer being discreet. That's why I really love using my 85 millimeter lens. But I like doing that because I know there are some people who they'll take their camera and they'll just come up into your face, take a photo and walk off or something. I don't personally like that sort of approach because I really like to have, compassion with people. I like to think of it, if I was in that situation, how would I respond to someone doing that to me? And I take that into consideration a lot. I try to do street photography. I don't want to look like a threat to anybody. That's very important. You don't want to look like a threat because if you don't look like that to someone, no one will ever bother you and people actually enjoy what you do. And the reason I say that is because there have been a couple of times where one has seen me actually taking pictures of them and was perfectly okay with it. And we actually ended up doing a photo shoot together after that because she enjoyed her picture so much. I actually had another that saw a video from Jason Vong, and they followed my Instagram account and knew a couple that I had just posted that same day on Instagram. So they tagged that couple and they were like, oh my goodness, I can't believe you took this image. So anyone that ever spots their photos that I've taken, if they come across them at any given point, I always print them a large print, kind of like the images that you see behind me, for them to have along with the, original digital file, so they can do whatever they want. I don't charge people for those images. I do this for the fun, and it just started out with giving me something different to do, but now it's kind of grown larger than what I intended it for it to be, where I really like to connect with people. I like to feel what they feel. I had a picture that will never see the light of day, but I didn't know I took this, where a woman was waiting for a train, and the doors opened. I was on the train and she was on the platform, and she was waiting for a different train at Marcy Avenue. And when I got back home and looked through the images, I saw that she was crying. And, I kind of got sad off of that, because had I known, I would have gotten off to see like what was wrong with her, like why was she crying? And I did not know that at the time. I just took the picture, but really wasn't in tuned to that specific image. And so because, she was someone that, clearly hurting, something is wrong, I don't know what's going on in her life that has brought her into tears, but that's something that I would never post, because I don't like posting things where people are not, you know, looking their best. I don't like posting images where people aren't feeling their best. So I take a lot of time to have compassion for the people that I'm photographing. So any pictures that people see, it's always going to be a people in their best way possible. That's simply it.
That's a perfect explanation, and a hello and shout out to Jason Vong, who's joining us here, and he remembers that moment. He said that photo was an epic moment. So thank you for that, Kenneth.
And hi, Jason. I knew he would be here. Um, so this one was a very interesting one. So Chicago is usually, you usually see a lot of people on the streets of Chicago. And this particular day, I don't know why, when I wanted to frame specific compositions like this, no one wanted to walk down the street. I had to wait and wait for this image, and there's another image that was after this. No one was walking down the street. So to get this photo, I actually had to wait a while. I saw this woman way down the street, and I saw this parking garage and this exit only sign, and I wanted to frame someone right in the middle where the spotlight was, but no one was coming. I'm like, this is anticipation extreme. It's like, I know I want this photo. I see a person. Now, of course, they could always go into another door, might quickly turn the corner, who knows? But I was like, I'm going to stand here because I hope she gets to this point. Now, this is one of those moments where if you miss the focus for this and you have to take another photo, you're not going to be very happy with yourself. I would have been very displeased, but I got it. I got the shot, got her perfectly centered, got that shot. So like with using the wide angle lens, I really love capturing reflections. So whenever there's inclement weather, 9 out of 10 times you can expect me outdoors. I don't like clear blue sky days. I usually don't photograph on those days. It's always if it's raining, if it's overcast, if there are clouds in the sky, those are the primary times when I'm actually photographing. So like here, I love capturing reflections, people at intersections, capturing the reflection off of one of the parking garages in Chicago. And the way that I maximize those reflections is you have to get as close to the reflecting plane as possible. That's how you really get that unique sort of effect of having that reflection. So there are times where my camera, where I have my little clips here, they're in the water because that's how low I get to really get those unique reflection shots that I take. So do I, risk, I have gotten my cameras wet, they're meant to be utilized. And I baby my cameras because they always still look brand new, but I do still go in there to get the shots that I want. So like here, World Trade Center Path Station, I love the reflections there, utilizing my wide angles. And this is an example of an autofocus image versus the manual focus lenses. And I just flip between the two. Some days I'm having a manual focus day. Other times I'm having a autofocus day. And so, getting more reflections, utilizing the 21, the 25 here. I was at an intersection and I saw a lot of people, you know, that was crossing this specific one, and I happened to see this puddle. So I actually stayed there for about 15 minutes, just capturing several people. And I just happened to capture this one of this lady trying to flag down a taxi. And so she was looking the opposite way because I forgot what happened behind me, but her reaction and her son's reaction just, they both shifted and I caught that shot. And I was like, this is perfect. And so like this image, I really love having what's around, really encompassing my compositions. So sometimes I'll just make a subject look very small while you have this big structure like the World Trade Center Path Station in the shot. That's kind of like my signature framing, you know, kind of having people towards the bottom of my frame, and then you have all this ginormous happenings at the top. I really love composing that way. And one thing I love doing is going to specific locations on a regular basis because you're always going to see something different. You have no, especially New York City, you can go to the same place every single day. You're bound to see something different, drastically different every day. So this was one where I actually didn't expect this photo, but I don't know what made me actually watch this woman pushing her child down the street on Fulton. But I was like, let me just track this and see where we're going with this. And just out of nowhere, her child just popped up and peeked out the side for that one shot and then went back down. And I was like, I don't know why he did that, but he did, and I got that shot. And so that's why I use flexible spot. If I was shooting or zone focus or wide focus, it wouldn't have focused on his face the way that it did. And just because of how I framed my shots, the focus dropped right there. So that's how I got the focus perfectly right on that photo. So still, same street, captured someone else that was taking pictures of her friends. I really loved what she was wearing. That stood out to me. Different colors, patterns. That stands out to me. Very rare do I photograph or have pictures of people wearing solid colors, especially black, because that really doesn't add a level, different layers to the image. Um, so I tend to kind of steer clear of all black. I generally like patterns. So here you see her clothes underneath are all black, but she has on that pop of color. That's why I focused in on her.
Kenneth, we had a question in particular about your use of the 85 millimeter. Teresa, who's joining us on Zoom, asks if by using the 85 millimeter, you kind of feel a little bit far away from the action, like a paparazzi. And if you can further expand upon that into what goes into your choice of a certain focal length when you're out shooting. Are there times where you're like, you know what, I feel like being right up in the action? Or are there times where you're like, you know what, I don't feel like interacting, I just want to kind of sit back and observe from a distance?
So for a lot of people, I think because it's not usually tied to street photography that much, the 85 sometimes seems like it's a very far away lens when it really isn't. Because if you're on a subway train in New York, say if I'm sitting on one side by the window, I can actually still photograph someone on the opposite side on the aisle seat without cutting off any faces or anything like that. I've done that. So you don't have to be as far away from someone as you might think with an 85. But it also comes down to what type of composition you're looking for. So if I do want to, maybe get closer, I can still do that with an 85, but it's not always the case of my thought process with the 85. It just depends on the situation and what I see. So how I go about choosing what I use because I don't, one thing that I will mention, I don't switch lenses throughout my days of while I'm photographing. I'm usually only taking 3 lenses, and whatever lens I start with, I might only change once and that's it. Because of course I'm using prime lenses, so I don't want to be changing lenses all throughout the day. And I like to really have a specific focus. So I don't want to be indecisive like that, where I'm like, okay, let me switch to the 21. No, let me go to the 85. You know what? I'm thinking the 40 is better. I don't want to have to go through all of those different changes and just use what I have. So sometimes I'll might even limit myself to just 2 lenses for the day because I don't want to really have to think about what I want to do while I'm shooting. So the reason, for the 85 is because, it's just comfortable for me at the start when I started doing street about 4 years ago. But I don't ever feel that I'm too far away with it. It just depends on the type of image. So like this one here, this police officer, before I took this, a friend of mine and I, we were actually out, and she was on the sidewalk, and we just happened to start up a conversation with her because she was busting people left and right that were blocking the intersection once the light turned red. And so normally I don't, ask anyone as far as taking their picture, but in that scenario we did. Is it okay if we take your pictures? So we wanted to take pictures of her busting people at the intersection. And I caught that one photo, and I'm like, her look said it all there. So I wasn't that far away from her. I think that's why I really like the 85, because it just gives that perception that it is, but it really isn't. When people actually see in person the images that I take and how close I am, they're actually very surprised by that.
Perfect.
So this is one where um, the guy knew that we were taking a picture, so it came by and I was like, "Oh, this is very interesting." And he saw that we had cameras. Sometimes people will see that you have a camera and they actually be excited. So this guy was loving it. Like he was up there kind of posing on the shop and all. I was like, okay, let me get my camera going here. And sometimes you don't ever really know what people's reactions are going to be. But I like to analyze people before I go about it. So I've never had an issue with anyone saying, "Oh, can you delete that picture or not take my photo?" I really take a lot of time to analyze the situation. If an image seems too risky to take, even if it's the best photo I could take, I don't do it because I myself don't feel like it's worth the risk, and I can just get something later. Hopefully I come with something that's even better than this photo. So I don't put myself in those situations to where I might have someone that might abuse me, or want to do anything of harm, or might dislike, whatever it may be. So I really pick and choose what specific subjects I capture. And I feel a lot of people might don't do that with their street photography, but that's just my preference because, again, I don't want to be invasive. I don't want to really become a part of anyone's personal space. I still want them to feel comfortable. I don't want to be a threat to anybody. So this is one that just walking down the street, I don't think she was making that face at me, but just where the camera captures, it's always fascinating to see what that person's reaction was at the time the photo was snapped. So a lot of times people think that in my pictures, that because their eyes look like they're connecting with my camera, that they're looking at me. Most times they're not. It's just that's where the camera stopped and their eyes just happen to be in that direction. Because I mean, like for this photo, I wasn't walking like holding the camera the whole time. It's like I came up to the intersection, hold up, take the shot, and then I'm still moving on. I Especially in an intersection, I don't usually stop, take the photo, and keep walking. I'm actually still walking. So that's why I really love the A9 for images like this. So this is one that I don't know why people love birds. I really don't. I don't know why people love birds. So this is one that I took, and a friend of mine, we were out walking and just having to see all these pigeons around. I'm like, okay, let me take some photos of them. So they, you know, New York pigeons, they're not bothered. They are so unbothered. Just took several pictures, and then I just happened to catch this as they were beginning to go in flight. And of course, the camera doesn't have bird um, eye autofocus, but it worked out perfectly, as far as just the tracking that the camera has. And I love the photo. I just didn't know a lot of people would love this too, because again, it's birds. Wouldn't expect that. So there are some scenes like this where I like taking different perspectives. So in one shot, you kind of see that my focus is more so on the train, whereas the other is actually on the lady reading her newspaper. So if someone is, standing there for a while, I like those different perspectives because it has a different story to it. You know, just what people look and view of this, will be totally different from one image to the other. And that's what I love about that, taking those different perspectives. And then again, I love the platform shots, taking them straight down. Um, I really like the stations such as the Astor Place station on the 6 line because it has an S curve. So the trains on the numbered lines generally have more um, harsh curves than the lettered lines. And so I tend to usually like those stations a little bit more for capturing people on the platform, just because that curvature, it pushes them kind of outside a bit. So when I'm looking straight down, they're kind of being brought out. So I don't have to worry about, kind of coming out too far or actually being able to single specific people out. So like on these, they're perfectly straight platforms because it's letter lines. But I like looking straight down, one shot, I have the train, that's my focus. The image on the far right, I actually have the lady that is focused versus the train, but it's in the background. And then in the middle, you have both. You have the train in focus and you have the people on the platform. And so it just, I like having different elements to my images. And so again, capturing, I could very well cut this image and just make it about her. But what does I feel like the story is bigger than that, because people might want to know, well, where is she? What is she doing? Why is she just standing there? People can see, oh, she's waiting on a train. Wonder what she's doing on her phone. Like you kind of expand on the story. And so that's why I like those other elements in the shot. Because I could have cropped that. I could have made it a tighter shot, but would the story have been the same? So another favorite of the birds. Again, don't know why people love birds. So the left shot is taken on the 9, and the right side is taken on the A6000. So many people think just because you don't have the latest and greatest features, you can't take a photo like that. That's proof that you can. My A6000 took that photo on the right. Looks just as good as the image that's on the left. That's taken with the Alpha 9. So it doesn't really matter about what you're using. It's about knowing what you have and using it to the best of your ability. That's all it is. So people wonder how I get away with the subway shots. I like photographing crowded trains. Why is that? Because if you do run into a situation, it's not very easy for people to really get through a crowded train. That's my thought process behind it. But it also makes it easier because people don't know who you're looking at. You could be looking at 10 different other things. So it's when you're kind of isolated with a person, that's usually a situation that I find, no, I'm not going to risk that because they're going to know there's no one else around. I have a camera and they see that, they're going to know. So that kind of puts people in that kind of situation where they might feel like you're a threat to them. So you might have a confrontation out with that. But on a packed train, not so much. because there are other elements involved. So people are a little bit not on guard when it comes to being around other people. There's other things going on. So that's why I prefer packed trains as opposed to those that aren't. Then again, you have where I handheld this. This is using with the manual Loxia 21. I was standing at an intersection and I saw a taxi SUV coming down the street. Now, this can be a very difficult photo to take because you have to time it right. Because I still wanted the lady that was at the street corner. So if I was too early in starting this, the taxi would have blocked her. So I really have to gauge the speed of the car to where I need it to stop based on my shutter speed, so that way it falls in the right spot. Because if I'm just a smidge off, the taxi's not in the shot or it's covering my subject. So it's very difficult to do. It's very mathematical in doing images like this. But it's not difficult. It's not hard to do. Once you practice at it, it's very easy. So this is one that a lot of people love, and people probably would have said something if I didn't show this. So this was an image that I did not like. I'll be honest, I did not like it when I took it because I didn't think it was a great photo. I sent this to one of my friends and my cousin while I was still on my flight, and they both had the same reaction. OMG, you took that? I'm like, yeah, on my flight. I'm still on the plane right now. They're like, you have to show her this. I was like, really? You think it's good? So by the time that message got to me, the lady was already, because we were now parked at the gate, and she was already in the aisle getting off the plane. So I thought, okay, well, I'll go find her at baggage claim. Maybe I'll see her. Never saw this lady again. And when I shared this online, it was a very popular image. Did not know it was going to be that way. I didn't think this was a great photo, but it just turned out that way. Sometimes I myself don't really know what I have until, maybe I do need a little bit of an opinion from other people. So because I got this so well, I was like, maybe I should try it again. So this was my second attempt. Not as great. Not as great. I myself have tried to duplicate my own photos. It doesn't work. It really does not work because everything just has to be perfect. And it wasn't. This was a totally different aircraft. The seating arrangement is very different. How the windows are very different. So you really can't control this environment, and trying to replicate an image like this, very difficult. I would have to be on that same type of aircraft. I would have to be in that same seat because not every seat is aligned to the windows the same way. So if I was maybe 3 seats up and she was in front of me, the windows wouldn't have lined up the same way. All of that are factors that you have to think about. So that changes that. That really changes that. So that was a failed attempt. I tried, but failed. And so, like capturing people, just, I was waiting to go into a restaurant and having to see this image. And I like the colors. That's what stood out to me. I love the colors, and I love that her shirt matched the outside of the building, this sort of teal or turquoise color. So that's what attracted me to capturing this. So again, subway shots. I love capturing people through doors of the trains. If you're really not sure about doing street photography, or you're just trying to start doing it, this is a great starting point. Capturing people on the platform, on the trains. Why is that? Because as soon as the doors start closing, once they're closed, they're kind of stuck on the train, or vice versa. If you see someone on the platform and you're on the train, you're on a train and you're long gone. Just be mindful though. It's New York. Train doors can reopen. So be mindful of that. That is one thing to keep in mind. I of course I love the long length distance of photos. That's just my signature. I don't like those ultra tight photos. I love having the ambiance of the scene in the shot. This was one where I was on a street corner. These were taken on the same exact corner. Girls in Starbucks behind me, and then this lady was literally to my left. So I was waiting for the girl in Starbucks to have a certain reaction, or like I was contemplating, can I get away with this shot? Because I'm like, there's no one around. There is no one around her. So it's gonna be obvious that if I hold the camera up and I'm shooting through this building, yeah, someone's gonna know. So I was thinking about that, but while I was thinking about it, I saw this lady over on her phone. So I was like, oh, let me grab this. So sometimes just staying in the same spot, you can see many different frames right on a street corner. Just look around you. You have to look around you. That's all it is. So I crossed the street now. So same area, just happened to cross the street now because I was where that sign is on the left, like where this car is on the opposite side of that. So same street corner, but this time I decided to pull out the wide angle lens and just catch the full ambiance of people at the intersection, cars coming through. So sometimes I want those big majestic images, and sometimes, I just want to pinpoint a specific subject. So again, same corner that all of these pictures were taken. I was able to sit down on like there was a fence and a wall. I sat on the wall and knocked off all of these different images. I'm like, I'm going to stand here for a while and just see what I can come up with. Because I like those low angle images, sitting, that was perfect. Just sitting on the side, knocking them off because I love the smokestacks in the background. I just wanted to see what can I capture on this one street corner. So you don't even have to move around. Pick a street corner, pick a location, and just see what comes about. Again, same street corner. This time I decided to go with a different lens. I decided to go with the 35. So this time I'm a lot closer to the subject. In this regards, I love umbrella shots. Those are always really good, especially people that walk New York with the clear ones so you can actually still see their face. I really love those. Um, so, very different feels as far as the editing. I decided one image I wanted to do cooler, the other I wanted to be a little bit warmer. So I just, for this image, I saw this couple on the left. There's actually two people there. And I just wanted to frame the light post. I feel like the image wouldn't have been as great if I didn't include the light post. So I saw them walking and just positioned myself, and they just happened to stop where I wanted them, and I took the photo. Couldn't have planned that better. So this is an unusual photo for me because one, like I said, I don't like people when they're isolated because it'll be more obvious. But in this regards, I'm like, okay, I think this one's pretty safe to take. But it's unusual because it's very different from my style. Up until now, if you notice, all of my images have kind of like a multi-layer element. And that's because of how I specifically angle my images. This image is almost too dead on for me. It still works, but it's not my typical style. A lot of times you'll see images of mine that has an unnecessary object in the foreground, then you have my subject, then you have a background. That on top of the Zeiss lenses, it just gives such a unique feel to it. That's why I love composing the way that I do. So a lot of my images won't be straight on. Very, very rare. It has to be a photo that I really like to use it, being that it's dead on to someone or not too far off at an angle to where you don't really get that depth perception. Because that's very unique to my style, having that depth perception. So this is an example of that. You have someone in the foreground, my subject's in the middle, then you have a background. Three different elements. That's how it gets, it just gives you different layers to draw your attention to. Because you're still going to go to the lady that's on their phone, but then you have these other elements in there and it just gives that 3D effect. And using Zeiss lenses, it just makes it even better. So same street for these, just happened to look one way on the left. And then I turned to my back and saw this guy standing there, captured that shot. And as you can see, I'm very low to capturing those so that way the buildings really stand out more in those shots. This is an example of using the crop body with the Loxia 35, using zone focus to focus where I want. These were taken during pandemic times as well. Another A6000 photo. I really love using the 6000. It's a good camera. It might be an old camera, but it's still a very good camera. So this was not planned. I just wanted the picture of the girl in the photo. How on earth this man perfectly got in my image and how he was walking perfectly positioned. When I took this, I actually was amazed myself. I was surprised. I sat there for 5 minutes because I could not believe I captured that. I was like, can that guy come back and do it again? But I literally did not see this shot coming. I just wanted her. I just wanted her. As I was taking the photo, I was like, no, I didn't get that. When I played it back, I saw this. And that's another thing. I don't review my images. So when I take the shot, it goes back to live view. I don't like the review showing because then that takes time away of me seeing another image. So I don't review any of my images, but for this one, I had to play it back and see it. But normally I don't review my photos after I've taken them. So, more subway shots with the A6000. Um, Grand Central, my favorite place in New York. I can spend 6 hours in Grand Central and have done that. Just people watching. I love Grand Central. So it's, still using the 6000. I love it. Like all of these, taken with the 6000 and the Luxia 35. This camera is very capable. I think a lot of people don't see this camera as being capable is because they buy this early on as like an entry or starting camera, but then they upgrade the camera body before they've ever upgraded the lenses. So people never have really seen the true performance of an A6000 because they just buy the camera either with the kit lens or they might have, other budget alternatives, but they never keep the camera long enough. So by the time they're shooting full frame, it might have the higher quality lenses. They don't have that A6000 to try those same quality lenses on an A6000. The A6000 is amazing. This shows that. This is why I keep it around to show people. You don't have to spend a lot. If you have good glass, a camera like that still does you justice. So this is one people have seen quite a bit. I was on the M train and I saw this shot. I was riding and I was like, so I'm standing in the doorway and what was going through my mind was, if she gets off before my stop, then I won't worry about it. I missed the photo. If she's still on by the time I get off, I'm taking this photo. The doors were open. I was at my stop. I took 2 images and this was my favorite. And then I walked off the train. I love this photo, but it took me, like, the train ride was maybe a good 10 minutes. But I took that time to really think about it. Do I want to really get this photo? Because I mean, I'm in close proximity because here I'm actually using the 55. So I'm actually pretty close. And I just was contemplating, do I want this photo? Do I want to take this image? So once we got to that stop, the doors open, took my 2 shots, I'm off the train. And this was with my original Sony A7. So it was a slower camera. I didn't have all the focusing features. So I had to be spot on because the railing can sometimes interfere with your focusing. And this is a good example of that. The first image, that's not what I planned to take. A lot of people think I did. No, I didn't. I was trying to take the woman, but it focused on the railing first, but I still liked it. I'm like, this is actually pretty nice. I like this. It changes the perspective because most people are going to focus on the person. No one's going to take the railing and make that the subject. But I like to invert things like that because it gives a different story. 2 totally different stories taking place here. So this is another that I had to show because this was a mistake. A lot of people think this was on purpose. This was a mistake. Just flat out mistake. I didn't take this photo. I didn't plan to take this photo. My camera did not focus properly. This was with the original A7. I was trying to capture the man that's in the foreground. Some kind of way, my camera focused on the background. When I brought this into post, I saw this couple in the background smiling while they were walking. When I tell you I cropped this a lot, I cropped this a lot. This is probably maybe an 8 to 10 megapixel photo as far as I cropped it from 24 megapixels. But that's the composition I wanted. So I'm like, I'm still going to use the guy, but he's more like a silhouette. But it gives that element. I have a foreground, have my subject, and then I have the background, those different layers. So the infamous couple that I saw in Grand Central, who I still to this day have not found after I don't know how long it's been, but I've never shown the other images in this set. So the first image is one that people have seen all over, and many networks have actually shared this image, even ABC New York for Valentine's Day a couple years ago. But I also took these other images. I sat there with my friend for about 20 minutes. This couple was just having a moment to themselves. And this is probably the best photo in Grand Central I've ever taken. But the middle photo stands out for a specific reason. It's not about the couple. Look in the background. If you're a true train buff or you're very familiar with Grand Central, those boards are changed. You don't see those boards in Grand Central because they've been replaced with new digital boards. So not only am I capturing a moment between this couple, but I'm also capturing a historical moment because I can't take a photo like that anymore. Those boards are no longer there. So it kind of gives also to the viewer, they'll know what time period this image was taken because of those boards in the background. And so I wanted that image, not thinking at the time that these were going to be replaced because they weren't installing the new boards at the time. But it was months later, I came back and I'm like, something seems different. The boards had changed. So it's like you're capturing moments within a moment. I'm capturing this couple, but I'm also capturing history because you'll never see that again. So, here's a moment where, I went from focusing on just a couple, and now I'm looking at the whole ambiance of Grand Central, using my 21, doing the long exposure. Now, I will say, this one image, now that I have thrown this in, I remember this was actually with the tripod. This is not a typical street photo because the specifics for this particular day was capturing long exposure. So that's the only reason why this had a tripod. Now, these were also taken the same day, switch lenses, and I just wanted to capture silhouettes with the sun beaming down and all these people going about their business through Grand Central. Very different feel, but, it's just telling different stories. I'm not moving, I'm not changing my location, still in the same spot, totally different whole, type of story being told. This one was one that I treasure because I couldn't have planned this myself. I went out because this was maybe at 12:30 in the morning. And the reason I was out at Grand Central at that time is because my friend had called me to come out to meet her down there. I was not in the mood. I was like, why? Why do I need to come out? Because I was so deep in Brooklyn. I'm like, it's going to take me a while to come out there to Grand Central. But I finally did, took my camera. I was like, well, I'm going to take some pictures if I'm coming out this late. And so I went to Grand Central while I was waiting. And I was standing there taking pictures. And I saw this guy coming behind me. And as he was walking, I said, is he going to walk in the middle? Sure enough, he started slanting over and walked straight in the middle. I never told him to do that. He just politely got in the middle and stayed in the middle. I knocked off as many frames as I could. I tried to stay there after he walked away to capture other people that were coming down. No one else walked in the middle. He was the only one. And he was the only person that walked alone. There were other people that came, but they were in packs. That was the only time that I had that. And he just perfectly walked in the middle. Love that. So love capturing people just on the subway cars, capturing their thoughts. This was at Roosevelt Island, also with the A6000 here. And I just like capturing those people just gazing, being in the moment. I'm kind of curious. What are they looking at? I want to be intrigued as well. So as we come to the end, I know there are people that might have editing questions. So this kind of gives you sort of a quick run through of how I go through editing one of my photos. So this is of the woman that was on my flight. And I don't do a lot of editing as a lot of people think. I get my images right from the camera. I try to get everything as perfect in camera as I can. The editing is just primarily for my personal creativity. That's all it is. It's never to fix an image. And when you think of it that way, your photography becomes better. If you rely on post processing to make your photo, then you never started with a good photo to begin with. That's just how I view it. If you can come out with a photo right from the camera that you're like, oh my goodness, this is beautiful, you're going to appreciate it more, and then it's going to have more meaning. So that way, when you do the post processing, you're going to just enjoy it that much more. So, hopefully this is, hearing some of my stories behind my images is helpful. Um, I do have blogs that goes even more in depth as far as like camera settings, other camera settings that I utilize, why I use certain lenses the way that I do, and even down to the camera. So, there's a variety of different things. And of course, I'm sure Jason Vong would mention this if he's still watching. I do respond to my messages online. So if you have further questions, I'm always there to answer them. And of course, I'm always gracious to B&H for having me as a guest.
Well, it was great to have you on. It's a ton of information, and it's always good to see everybody's individual perspective. I mean, everybody has a camera nowadays, right? But everybody's perspective is completely different, especially when you're talking about a genre that's as am- it's an ambiguous genre, street photography. It's like you can't really put a stamp on it. So it was great to kind of get inside your head, Professor, and see where your mind is at when you're out there creating the images. Jason said yes, he does. DM him. So if you guys do have any questions, we're going to try to get to a couple questions here before we let Kenneth go for the evening. But if you don't have a question that we don't get answered, feel free to reach out. Definitely shoot him a follow on Instagram as well. Now we had some questions, more gear questions. And Dean asked particularly, you had mentioned earlier how with street photography, you like to stay away from the larger megapixel cameras, where a 24 megapixel camera you'll favor for your street photography. What and Dean wants to know, what's your reasoning for that? Is there a reason why you prefer the lower megapixel count for street?
Just because of the file sizes, they're more manageable. I'm not like if you look at the images behind me, these are probably the most that those pictures ever get used for. Those are 16 by 24s that are behind me, and they're not really going to be something that uh, will be shown in a big format or really heavily used in that regards. But even at 24 megapixels, you still have a lot of information because for one of the trade shows last year, Zeiss actually blew up one of my A9 street images into an 11-foot by 8-foot image, and it looked beautiful. So you don't need 42 megapixels like the R series that I utilize, or even with the new and the 61 megapixel sensor. It's not necessary. 24 megapixels is a great sweet spot. The reason I'm okay with it is because, like the one example I showed where I cropped, that was the only image cropped in this entire presentation. That was the only one, and you saw maybe about 70 different images because I don't crop my photos. It's very rare. So I don't look at my images as, oh, let me take this photo. I can crop this later. I don't shoot that way. I take my photos and frame them exactly how I want. So that way, once you see them, they're still in their full 24 megapixels.
Well, it kind of leads into what you were saying with editing, getting it right in camera. And then, I like the distinction that you pointed out that your editing is for your personal taste. It's not to correct. It's really you got it the way you want it, but now you're going to put the finishing touches on it. So I think it was a really interesting distinction that you made there between heavily editing to try to correct an image that you just didn't get right in your settings, and taking an image into processing to enhance it for what you like out of it.
And part of that too is because I've seen a lot of misinformation as far as my work and what people perceive it to be. And I began sharing my unedited images online. So that way people can see this is what I'm starting with, but this is what I end up. It's just how I'm feeling. This is what I saw this image to be. Do I have to edit my images? No, not necessarily. I get what I want out of the camera, but in adding the editing element, people recognize that's a Professor Hines image. People know my work because of that. So that's the only reason of why I do it. But so that way I kind of take away that sort of mindset that people think that I rely on editing is why I take it a step further to show my unedited work. I know there are some photographers that don't like to do that, but I don't hide anything. There's literally nothing about what I do that I hide. There's no secrets. If I'd say if there's one secret is I take my photos just lower. That's how I get my look. That's it. There's nothing, I if I can use an A6000, it just shows people you don't need an A9, you don't need an A7R. I get away with my 6000 as well. And that's why I keep that camera. I don't plan on retiring the 6000. I'm getting an A1, but the 6000 is still going to be there because I want to keep that camera to show people you don't need to spend a lot on gear. Just understand what you have. The 6000 is so powerful that most people don't know what they have in their hands.
So true. It's the same thing. I tell people all the time, every camera company makes an amazing camera nowadays. It doesn't matter whether it's the earliest, the beginning consumer models all the way up to the prosumer and professional. If you have a digital camera nowadays, you can do amazing things with it regardless. So it's great that you point that out. And like you said prior to that, it's about you. It's about what you want out of your images. And the internet is never going to be 100% happy. I think anybody who ever has gone on YouTube, Reddit, any online forum, there's always going to be somebody who doesn't like what you do, and it doesn't matter as long as you like what you do. Now, Dave asks in particular if you've ever used the Zeiss 135 millimeter f2.8. Have you had a chance to shoot with that at all?
I have. So I did not show any of those in this because it's not a primary lens, but I have shot street with it. Um, it's a harder lens to use because it is slower. So using it underground isn't the best because it is a tighter lens and then it's slower. So to get enough of a shutter speed to utilize it, I have to at least be about 100, 35, 135th of a second shutter speed or faster for that lens. So my ISO is going to be increased. And I'm okay with that though. A lot of the images that you saw are actually shot at very high ISOs. Many on Instagram had asked why I don't utilize lower ISOs like ISO 100 or 200. And that is because Street has so many varying elements where you can go from photographing a highlight to photographing a shadows within maybe 3 seconds. And to adjust for that change of lighting, that drastic change of lighting, takes time to where you have missed one of those images, depending on where you were shooting. So I like to have everything set to a specific parameter. So I always shoot aperture priority. I do not shoot manual because of that. I don't want I always put it this way. Think about the new A1 that's coming out. This is a $6,500 camera. $6,500. It can do everything.
Mhm.
But why do we shoot manual for a lot of people ask for a lot of these features in these cameras? Why do we shoot manual? If we have the technology, we have all of these cameras that can do these wonderful functions and we request them, why don't we ever allow the camera to do some of that work for us? So I have no problem shooting in an automatic setting. I have no problem with that because these cameras are intelligent. They can do that. Just because you shoot a priority doesn't mean you're not a professional. I do not shoot manual for 95% of my work. And the reason is I know how to shoot manual. I learned how to shoot manual, and I understood when to use it and when not to use it. And for street photography, I feel like that's not the place for me to use it. People can shoot however they choose, but I will miss moments if I do that. Now, people might assume in using manual lenses, I'm missing photos. No, I don't. I have everything set. I know how I need everything to be, so that way I don't miss my images.
Amen. I mean, you don't buy a Ferrari and push it down the street, right? Kind of, kind of,
I'm gonna
kind of.
use that one. That is a great one. That is
It's true. I mean, you put it in perspective perfectly. Where yeah, the internet clamors for in body stabilization for no matter how good the autofocus is. It's like the Alpha One now has eye autofocus for birds because face and eye detect and dogs and cats wasn't good enough. So it's like they stepped it up. Sony said, well, we're going to put it in for birds now because there are people out there that I'm sure said, well, we want it for bird photography. So yeah, if you have all the technology, use it. Now we had a question. I'm gonna pair two together here. Number one, the people wanted to know if you're a wide open shooter or a stop down shooter, and also how do you expose for skin tones when you're out there shooting in the street?
I like those questions. Whoever asked those, great questions. I've not been asked those. So the first one, it depends. So, I'll maybe go back through a few here. So situations like this, when I'm using autofocus lenses, this kind of goes back to how I mentioned shooting. The shooting style is different from a manual focus to an autofocus lens. More times than not, I'm wide open on autofocus lenses. On manual focus, I'm stopped down, maybe f7.1, f8, f9. It really depends. Here's why. Because it's an autofocus lens, I can nail the focus with that. But if I'm trying to capture a moving subject on a manual lens, and this goes back to utilizing the zone focus as you see here on the Loxia, if I'm stopped all the way down to 2.8, like the 21 millimeter, I am narrowing my field, my depth of field. And so a person has to be specifically in this area if they're going to be in focus, because I've narrowed that so much versus I have more wiggle room if it's stopped down to like an f8. So once they're in that position, and it's a quirky thing, but because I'm a mathematics person, that's what I majored in at school, I look at everything as a mathematical equation. So I know exactly where specific distances are. I know how compositions are going to be without even using that specific lens. I view everything as a focal length. So based on what lens I'm using, where I set the focus, what the aperture is, I know exactly where I need them to step and when to take the picture. So that way I'll get them in focus. If they're walking towards me, I know with the stop down aperture, I have some wiggle room. I can get away with a couple of images. If I shot the manual lenses wide open, I have a very small margin of error, and that becomes greater the longer your lens is. So 21, more forgiving. If I go to an 85, like the 85 2.4 Loxia, it's not as forgiving because it's a telephoto lens, and your depth of field is going to be a lot narrower with that lens, especially the closer your subject gets to you. You don't have much room to work with.
Definitely. Well, Professor, this has been brilliant. It's really been enlightening. Like I said, to not only get the advice and the tips from you, but hearing the whys of what you do out there on the street is just as important as hearing what you do and what you're using. So huge thank you for you taking this time to answer everybody's questions, let us in on your world out there in the street. Also, huge thank you to Zeiss and to all of our viewers out there who tuned in. Definitely, Kenneth, if you want to throw your Instagram and website and everything back up on the screen there. So if you guys didn't get this, grab a screen grab, pull your phone out, take a picture of the screen, so you guys can make sure to throw Professor Hines a follow. Definitely check out his work there. And I always encourage people when looking at photographers' pages, we make our websites so that you can view them on a nice big screen, really get the full picture of our images. Nobody wants to look at a picture that's that big. So definitely check out the website, do it justice. So for all of you out there, this has been a wonderful hour and a half of the B&H virtual event space. So we thank you for that, for extending time with us, Kenneth. We'll catch you guys all next time on another rendition of the B&H virtual event space. You guys have a good night.